Hey guys, tonight we slip past the world's creaking doors, tiptoeing barefoot on cold mosaic tiles, out of your own ordinary time, and into the strange, midnight-lit chambers of power. It's the hour when palaces glow with lamplight and marble halls echo with slippered footsteps, the hour when lineage means more than love, and power might come from a birthmark you didn't even know you had. Imagine it. The air smells of frankincense and night, blooming jasmine. Beyond the silk curtains, someone's always watching. A cousin, a rival, a silent scribe. You're not just you tonight. You're anyone born to rule, or to wish you could. Maybe you're the firstborn, heart-pounding with the thrill of inheritance. Or the overlooked younger sibling, counting up your secret reasons for revenge as you listen for the turn of a key. Fair warning, in this world, you probably won't survive this story. But hey, at least you'll leave a nice statue. So, before we go any further, if this quiet space makes you feel even a little less alone, you can like the video and subscribe, but only if it feels right to your heart. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Are you lying awake in a quiet room at 2 am? Or maybe starting your day in a rainy city, eyes still heavy? Drop your time and place in the comments. Let's remind each other we're not alone out here. Now, dim the lights, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin tonight's slow, strange journey together here on Timeless Sleep. You enter a torchlit hall where shadows stretch tall and thin, and every echo might be the whisper of a secret, or the memory of someone who didn't last the night. Moonlight filters through ancient latticework. If you reach out, your fingers might graze a velvet curtain, or a dagger hidden just out of sight. But tonight is not a night for fear. You're here to learn what it's like to live in a world where every parent looks at their newborn and wonders, will you be the one? In the flickering glow, you sense it's all about thrones, about who gets to sit, and who gets sent away, perhaps to a tower, perhaps to a grave, marked only by rumour. Power is the oldest lullaby, sung softly over the cradle. Lineage, the first chain you ever wear. You shuffle forward, and history starts to breathe beside you, restless and alive. Picture a Sumerian night more than 4,000 years ago, the ziggurats stacked up toward the sky, and the city of humming with the business of kingship. Here, in the world's first cities, rulers claim descent from gods. The high priestess, Inanna's own mouthpiece, selects a king who must be both lover and son, blessed and doomed by his blood. You slip past a pair of guards, faces hidden by bronze helmets, and hear the king's mother, Ninsun, quietly advising from behind the curtain. In Mesopotamia, as everywhere else, lineage is never just about blood, it's about legitimacy. And legitimacy is what keeps your head on your shoulders and your enemies at bay. It's funny, really, how the birth order can weigh heavier than a golden statue. Firstborn sons are treasured, their every coffer matter for priests and omens. But even here, the night teems with others, second sons, daughters, the half-brother with a secret claim and a silent knife. In your mind's eye, you see Sargon of Akkad, a gardener's son who becomes the king of the Four Quarters, not by blood, but by sheer nerve. Still, even Sargon, once crowned, invents a divine lineage for himself, because nobody trusts a ruler who sprang up out of nowhere. You can't help but smile. Even the boldest upstart knows you need the right last name. You wander on, your toes brushing thick carpets, your breath making halos in the cool air. The world spins, and suddenly you are standing in a dimly lit chamber in Mycenae, the scent of roasted barley and lamp oil mixing in your nostrils. A king's tomb lies open, gold death mask shining in the gloom, and the story is always the same. My father was a king. My grandfather a hero. Around you the walls are painted with scenes of battles and feasts, but the real drama is the tension you feel under your skin, everyone watching everyone else, everyone counting their cousins. Lineage isn't always a straightforward thing, you realise. Inheritance can get messy, especially when the king's wives are many and his children scattered. You brush past a polished bronze mirror and glimpse your own face. Are you the legitimate heir, born of the queen? Or are you the clever son of a concubine, waiting for the moment when no one is looking? The rules keep changing, but the stakes stay the same. You think of Agamemnon and Menelaus, two brothers who split a kingdom and end up setting the world on fire. Sometimes, being born into power means living with the expectation that you'll spill blood for it. Your steps take you to a Persian garden, silver moonlight illuminating cypress trees and the glimmer of water in the distance. Here, lineage is calculated with almost mathematical precision. The great king's sons are numbered, their mothers' statuses recorded in clay tablets and echoed in whispers behind every column. Bastards are a problem, but so are too many legitimate sons. How do you choose which child inherits the empire? Sometimes the answer is, you don't. You let them fight it out, and whoever survives writes the family history. All around you, the ancient world seems to hum with the same low tension. It's not enough to be born, you have to be recognised. And recognition means ceremony, spectacle, the right omens, and more than a little luck. A golden diadem presses heavy on your brow. You feel the weight of expectation. Even in sleep, the heirs of empire dream restless dreams. You step over a threshold, and suddenly the floor is tiled in cool marble, veined with purple and white, the chill biting at your bare feet. You're somewhere in the palace of Knossos, where the labyrinth twists and bends, and a bull's head is carved above every door. The Minos dynasty claims its right from Zeus himself, and, not for the last time, a story about gods is used to justify the rule of mortals. You pass by a room filled with jars of oil and honey, the spoils of trade, and hear the laughter of a princess echoing through empty corridors. You know, somehow, that her fate depends entirely on whom she marries, and what her children will be called. All this bloodline business can get ridiculous. Sometimes, you realise, the old stories are rewritten to suit the moment. Suddenly, a hero is made the son of a god or a king, even if his real father was a farmer who just happened to swing a sword at the right moment. In Egypt, pharaohs add new ancestors to their lists the way you might add followers to your socials. The more, the merrier, and nobody's fact-checking. You get the feeling that history's official version is written not with ink, but with a very expensive chisel, and if you're out of favour, your name gets chipped right off the wall. Still, for every prince or princess born into a gilded cradle, there's a dozen others just out of reach. The uncles and cousins who hover at the edge of the feast, waiting to see which way the wind blows. You pause and listen, picking up the cadence of conspiratorial whispers. Sometimes, the story goes, a sickly baby is hidden away and replaced with a heartier peasant child, all for the sake of the succession. Sometimes, a twin is smuggled out in the night. Nobody wants to talk about it in the daylight, but in the shadowed corridors of power, everyone has a backup plan. As you wander deeper, the idea of legitimacy starts to feel slipperier. Blood matters, yes, but so does narrative, and so does the support of the right people at the right time. A king is only a king if his soldiers salute, his priests bless, and his people believe. The rest is just family drama, endlessly retold. You pass a mural of lions and eagles locked in combat, and think, sometimes, the most important thing you inherit isn't land or gold, but a good story. Your eyelids grow heavy as the moon rises higher, casting strange patterns across the floor. But the air still buzzes with old anxieties. Will the baby be a boy or a girl? Will the firstborn survive the fever? What if the gods are angry, or the crops fail? You realise that every succession is a gamble, a long, slow roll of the dice with everyone's lives on the table. Suddenly a burst of laughter breaks the tension. In one corner, a pair of brothers are arguing over who gets the bigger share of honeycakes, not the throne. You smile, because some things never change. Even the mightiest emperors started out squabbling over toys and privileges. Maybe the real story isn't just about who sits on the throne, but who gets the last piece of baklava. The night deepens, and you keep moving, pulled along by the undertow of ambition and hope, jealousy and fear. You know, now, that power is a tide. It can sweep you up or leave you stranded no matter who your parents were. And yet, in every age, people line up to claim it, ready to rewrite their lineage or risk everything for a shot at glory. You feel the centuries slide by as you drift between worlds, your footsteps silent on a path worn smooth by generations of dreamers and schemers. In every palace there's a nursery. In every nursery the seed of 1,000 stories, some bright, some bitter. The moon keeps watch as you slip from chamber to chamber, wondering which child will grow up to be king and which will vanish into legend or darkness. Outside, a night bird calls, and for a moment you remember the world you left behind, your own bed, your own family, your own secret hopes. But tonight, you're part of something older and stranger, where power and lineage run deeper than sleep, deeper than the roots of trees. And as the palace grows quiet, you realise you've only just begun. You move without quite meaning to, the way you do in dreams, drifting from one torchlit corridor into another, where the air feels thicker, heavier, as if soaked with promises made to the sky. The walls here are carved with symbols you half recognise, suns with human faces, winged discs, thunderbolts frozen in stone. This is where rulers stop pretending their power is merely inherited and start insisting it's ordained. You feel it immediately, that subtle shift. Lineage is no longer just about who your parents were, but about which God supposedly leaned down and touched your cradle in the night. You stand beneath a ceiling painted deep blue, dotted with gold stars, and you sense that this room has heard centuries of oaths. Kings come here when they need to be more than men. They come when blood alone doesn't feel strong enough to hold the throne. You imagine yourself stepping forward, placing your hand on a cold altar, swearing that your right to rule flows directly from the heavens. Outside, the city sleeps. Inside, priests murmur, incense curls upward, and a story is being born that will outlive everyone in the room. In ancient Egypt, this feeling is almost tangible. You drift along the Nile at night, its black surface reflecting the stars like a second sky. The pharaoh is not just king here, he is Horus made flesh, Ra's chosen son, the living hinge between gods and people. When he speaks, it is said, the universe listens. You imagine being born into this role, wrapped in linen, your name whispered into eternity before you can even open your eyes. Your lineage is divine by default, your blood is sacred, and if anyone doubts it, the temples, the rituals, the endless lists of ancestors carved into stone will remind them. But even gods, it turns out, need paperwork. You wander through a hall lined with reliefs, each one carefully showing an unbroken chain of fathers and sons stretching back into myth. When the chain breaks, and it often does, someone fixes it. A forgotten uncle becomes a son. A foreign conqueror suddenly discovers his mother dreamed of a god the night he was conceived. You realise that divine right is flexible, surprisingly so, bending to the needs of whoever holds the chisel. You cross into Mesopotamia again, where kings like Hammurabi stand before towering steels, hands raised towards Shamash, god of justice. The laws etched below are not presented as human decisions, but as gifts from the divine. You feel the cleverness of it. If the gods wrote the rules, who are you to argue? If the gods chose the king, rebellion becomes not just treason, but sacrilege. Power, wrapped in holiness, is harder to touch. As you move, you begin to notice the quiet anxiety beneath all this confidence. For every proclamation of divine favour, there's a fear that the gods might withdraw it. Omens are watched obsessively, a deformed calf, an eclipse, a strange dream. Any of these could mean the heavens are displeased. You picture a king lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if his latest decision has tipped the cosmic balance. Lineage might say he deserves the throne, but divine approval has to be renewed over and over, with sacrifices and spectacle. You slip into a different rhythm now, the cadence of Greek myth and city-states. Here, divine lineage is almost fashionable. Heroes trace their family trees back to Zeus with alarming frequency. You smile faintly at how crowded Olympus must be with all these supposed offspring. Still, the claim carries weight. If you can say you're descended from a god, you're not just another aristocrat, you're something special, set apart. Cities compete over whose founder had the best divine parentage, whose bloodline sparkles brightest with myth. You walk through Athens at dusk, the Acropolis looming above, and sense the tension between old kingship and new ideas. Even as democracy begins to murmur into existence, lineage refuses to let go. Noble families guard their ancestry fiercely, reciting it like a spell. Divine descent becomes a way to maintain prestige when crowns are no longer guaranteed. Power adapts, but it never disappears. The scene shifts again, softly, like a curtain drawn by an unseen hand. You're in a Roman forum, lanterns flickering, statues looming larger than life. Rome, practical Rome, claims not just any god, but Venus herself as the ancestor of its ruling family. Aeneas, half-divine refugee, becomes the linchpin of imperial legitimacy. You feel the smooth efficiency of it. Rome doesn't just conquer, it inherits destiny. When an emperor points to his lineage, he's pointing to the founding of the city, to fate itself unfolding exactly as planned. Yet Rome also shows you how fragile these claims can be. Emperors rise without royal blood, then scramble to graft themselves onto divine family trees. Adoption becomes a tool not just of politics, but of myth-making. You're adopted, and suddenly you're the son of a god-descended emperor, your past rewritten in a stroke. Blood bends to narrative, and narrative hardens into law. You notice how often these divine claims emerge in moments of uncertainty. A new dynasty, a civil war, an unexpected death. That's when the gods get loud. Coins are minted with divine symbols, temples are restored, public rituals grow more elaborate. You can almost hear the unspoken plea, believe us. Believe this was meant to be. The people might nod, might even feel comforted. After all, it's easier to sleep at night if you think the universe has a plan. Your journey carries you eastward again, into lands where kings call themselves King of Kings, chosen by the supreme god to rule over all others. Here, divine favour is paired with cosmic order. The ruler is not just blessed, but necessary, the linchpin holding chaos at bay. You walk through a palace where reliefs show the king towering above enemies, aided by a winged figure hovering protectively behind him. The message is clear: oppose this man, and you oppose the structure of reality itself. But beneath the carvings, beneath the rituals, you sense the human element struggling to breathe. Sons still compete. Brothers still plot. Divine right doesn't erase jealousy, it intensifies it. If the throne is chosen by the gods, then losing it isn't just political failure, it's personal rejection by the cosmos. You imagine siblings raised together, taught the same prayers, staring at the same stars, each secretly convinced that the gods favour them more. As you move through these spaces, time blurs. You pass through coronations where priests lift crowns high and crowds roar, and through quiet moments where a ruler stands alone, freshly crowned, realising how small he feels beneath the weight of expectation. Divine Lineage is a powerful story, but it's also a lonely one. If you're chosen by the gods, who can you really trust? You pause in a temple courtyard, moonlight pooling around your feet. You think about how these ideas seep into everyday life. If the king is divine, then his family is special by extension. His siblings, his children, his parents, all touched, in some small way, by sacredness. This closeness to the divine begins to justify behaviours that would otherwise feel strange, even unsettling. Keeping power within the family starts to look less like selfishness and more like cosmic responsibility. You feel the ground being prepared for choices that will echo through generations. The air cools as night deepens, and your thoughts slow. You realise that divine right is not just about control, it's about comfort. For rulers, it soothes the fear of chaos. For subjects, it offers an explanation for inequality that feels less random, less cruel. If the gods chose this family, then perhaps suffering has meaning, and order will return with the sunrise. Still, cracks show through the gold. You see rebels invoking rival gods, prophets declaring the king has lost divine favour, priests switching sides when the omens change. Divine right is persuasive, but not invincible. It must be constantly performed, constantly renewed. Without ceremony, without belief, it fades like smoke. You take one last look around this sacred landscape of crowns and constellations. The stars above seem indifferent, distant, but below them, humans are working tirelessly to claim their attention. You feel the pull forward toward the next layer of this story, where divine claims start to tangle with the most intimate bonds of all, the family itself. Your steps slow, your breathing deepens. Somewhere, far away, a new ruler is being born, already wrapped in stories that will shape their life. And as you drift onward, you carry with you the quiet understanding that power, when dressed as destiny, becomes something people will defend with everything they have, even their own blood. You drift now toward the river that feels like a spine holding the world upright, the Nile sliding past in slow, dark breaths, and you sense immediately that the rules here are different. The air is warm even at night, heavy with water and stone, and something faintly metallic, like old gold. Palaces rise along the banks, their columns catching moonlight, and inside them, families do not behave the way yours does. Here, power does not just pass through blood, it circles within it, looping back on itself with deliberate care. You step into this world quietly, because these are not stories meant for shouting. These are whispered truths, spoken only among those who already understand. You walk through a palace corridor painted with scenes of gods embracing, of kings crowned by falcons, of queens standing beside them, equal in height, equal in gaze. In Egypt, the pharaoh is divine, yes, but divinity, you learn, must be protected. If the ruler is the living embodiment of Horus, then his blood is not merely royal, it is sacred substance. And sacred substance, you are told without being told, should not be diluted. This is where the idea settles in, calmly, almost reasonably. To keep the gods close, you keep the family close too. You imagine growing up here, knowing from the beginning that your sister is not just your sister. She is your mirror, your counterpart, the one person whose blood matches yours closely enough to maintain cosmic balance. You watch two royal children play beside a lotus pond, their laughter echoing off stone. Tutors hover nearby, already shaping them for roles neither chose. They are taught the myths early: Isis and Osiris, siblings and spouses, divine order maintained through sacred union. The story is not presented as strange. It is presented as ancient, inevitable, comforting. If the gods did it, why shouldn't you? As you move deeper into the palace, you sense how carefully this idea is wrapped in ritual. Marriages are not private affairs here. They are public performances of stability. When a pharaoh marries his sister, it is announced with ceremony, recorded on temple walls, framed as an act of devotion to Ma'at, the principle of balance and harmony that holds the universe together. You stand in a courtyard as priests chant and incense burns, and no one flinches. To them, this is not taboo. This is duty. Still, beneath the smooth surface, there are layers of complexity. Not every sibling marriage is the same. Some are symbolic, others fully binding. Some queens hold real power, their names carved beside their brothers' husbands, their faces given equal prominence in reliefs. Others fade into the background, honoured in title, but absent in action. You realise that sibling marriage is not a single practice, but a flexible tool, used differently depending on the needs of the moment. When legitimacy is strong, the marriage reinforces it. When legitimacy is shaky, the marriage tries to repair it. You pause before a wall carved with generations of rulers, each one paired with a queen whose titles read King's Sister, King's Wife, King's Daughter. The repetition is hypnotic. You trace the lines with your eyes and feel time folding in on itself. This family has been marrying itself for centuries, each union meant to echo the first divine pairing, each child meant to be proof that the gods still approve. It is comforting, in a way, to imagine continuity like this, an unbroken circle in a world that so often fractures. But even here, in this carefully managed system, reality intrudes. You hear the whispers now, soft as linen brushing stone. Not all children thrive. Some are sickly. Some die young. Courtiers notice patterns long before scribes record them. Yet the tradition persists, because abandoning it would mean admitting that the divine plan might be flawed. And that is a thought too dangerous to entertain openly. Better to trust the gods and the blood and hope the next generation will be stronger. You wander into the private chambers, where the public myths soften into human moments. A queen sits by a window, watching the river, her expression unreadable. She is both sister and wife, revered and constrained. Her power depends on her closeness to the king, but that closeness is also a cage. You sense her awareness of the delicate balance she must maintain, loyal, fertile, visible but not threatening. In Egypt, queens can be powerful, but their power is always tied to the family structure. To step outside it would be to step into chaos. As the night deepens, you begin to understand how sibling marriage simplifies certain problems while creating others. By marrying within the family, the royal house avoids alliances that might empower rival families. There are no in-laws with armies, no foreign dynasties staking claims through marriage. Everything stays contained, controlled. From a political standpoint, it makes a strange kind of sense. You feel the cold logic of it settle in your chest. Power prefers simplicity, even when that simplicity carries hidden costs. You think of famous names murmured through the halls, rulers whose stories survive precisely because they leaned so hard into this tradition. Cleopatra, centuries later, will marry her brothers not out of affection, but necessity, playing the ancient game with a sharp mind and steady hand. But even long before her, the pattern is set. Brother marries sister, son follows father. The gods nod, at least publicly. The people sleep a little easier, believing the cosmos is still in order. Yet belief is a fragile thing. You move into a temple annex where priests debate quietly, their voices low. Some argue that the gods care more about ritual correctness than blood purity. Others insist that lineage is everything. These debates never reach the public ear, but they shape decisions all the same. You realise that even the most ancient traditions are maintained by constant negotiation, by people choosing again and again to keep them alive. Outside, the Nile shifts, indifferent. It floods and recedes, nurturing fields and washing away traces of yesterday's certainties. You watch its surface ripple and think about how unnatural this stillness feels, how much effort it takes to freeze a family line in place. Nature prefers mixing, movement, change. Power prefers repetition. Somewhere between the two, these sibling marriages persist, neither entirely natural nor entirely artificial, but sustained by belief. You imagine the children born of these unions, raised with an awareness of their importance from their first breath. They are taught that they are closer to the gods than anyone else, that their bodies are vessels of order. How heavy that must feel, even before they understand what marriage means. How isolating. You sense that loneliness now, the quiet knowledge that your world is smaller than most, defined by walls, by expectations, by a future already written. And yet, there is pride here too. To be part of this lineage is to be part of eternity. Names carved in stone do not fade easily. The very act of sibling marriage becomes a statement. We are not like other families. We are something older, something set apart. You feel the seductive pull of that idea. In a world of uncertainty, belonging to a sacred pattern can feel like safety. As you continue walking, you notice how art smooths over discomfort. Reliefs show idealized figures, flawless bodies, serene expressions. There is no hint of struggle, no acknowledgement of doubt. The official story is calm, balanced, eternal. It is only in the silences between carvings that you sense the human cost. A brother who might have preferred a different life. A sister who understood too well what her role required. These stories rarely make it into stone. The palace grows quieter as you reach its deepest chambers. Lamps burn low. Somewhere, a couple sleeps, siblings bound by ritual, by power, by a belief older than memory. You do not judge them. You simply observe, aware that their choices are shaped by forces larger than themselves. In this world, love is secondary. Stability is everything. You pause, breathing slowly, letting the weight of it all settle. Sibling marriage here is not scandal. It is structure. It is a way of holding the universe steady, of convincing everyone, including the rulers themselves, that tomorrow will look like today. Whether that belief is true matters less than the fact that it is shared. As you turn away from the Nile and drift onward, you carry this understanding with you. Power does not just reshape laws and borders. It reaches into the most intimate spaces, rewriting what family means, what closeness means, what is permitted in the name of order. And in the soft Egyptian night, beneath stars that have watched all of this unfold, the royal bloodline continues its careful circular dance. You find yourself drawn westward, following a trail of ancient dust into a landscape that feels sharper, more austere. The scent of the Nile gives way to the dry tang of olive trees and the low hum of cicadas. Soon you are walking beneath the brooding sky of Sparta, a city that moves to its own relentless rhythm, one dictated by iron, by discipline, and by a code that seeps into the bones. Here, the notion of lineage is transformed into something lean and spare, and the rules for family, inheritance, and power take on a new kind of severity. The houses you pass are simple by royal standards, built more for endurance than for show. Their walls are thick, the courtyards small, and the voices you hear are low, purposeful. In Sparta, every child is born into a world of expectations that are both heavier and stranger than most. The idea of blood matters, but it is never just about royalty or divine ancestry. Here, lineage is less about gods, and more about the relentless pressure to serve the city-state. You feel the difference in the air. Family is not simply a private affair, it is a public resource. You walk into one of the agoge, Sparta's famed schools for boys. The room smells of sweat, earth, and a little fear. The sons of citizens are gathered in rows, learning not only how to fight, but how to recite the names of their ancestors. Bloodline here is measured not in terms of personal inheritance, but in a duty owed. To be the child of a Spartan is to bear a legacy of obedience and sacrifice, to exist within a network of kin that supports, and sometimes smothers, every dream you might have. Even as a child, you know your fate is linked not just to your father, but to an entire line stretching back through generations of warriors. But there are subtler games afoot. Behind the severity, you sense a peculiar kind of flexibility. Spartan kingship is unique in the ancient world. There are always two kings, each drawn from a separate royal family, the Aegeans and the Eurypontids. The logic, at least on the surface, is balance. One bloodline checks the other, and together they prevent any single house from seizing absolute power. You sense how this dual kingship twists the usual rules of succession into something less predictable. Each line guards its own, but must share the stage. In the palace, you witness councils where old men in red cloaks debate lineage as much as law. The succession is supposed to be clear, father to son, but in practice it is often anything but. Deaths in battle, sudden illnesses, and political intrigue can leave both dynasties scrambling for legitimacy. The concept of purity matters here too, but the focus is on the endurance of the line, the preservation of Spartan values. Marriages are arranged not to amass wealth or expand territory, but to reinforce the social fabric, to ensure that only the strongest, most loyal citizens become the mothers and fathers of future Spartans. You watch as a Spartan queen, her jaw set, stands beside her king during a festival. Unlike in other Greek cities, women in Sparta possess an unusual kind of visibility. They own property, they train, and they have a voice in the home. This empowerment is both a reflection of and a necessity for the Spartan system. With men constantly away at war, the women are the keepers of the household, the guardians of lineage in a most literal sense. They are expected to bear strong children, to keep the estate running, to remind their sons that their blood is both privilege and burden. You overhear a conversation between two women, perhaps sisters-in-law, perhaps rivals. Their words are spare, but every syllable carries the weight of inheritance. Who will marry whom? What alliances are being brokered? The stakes are never merely personal. Every decision ripples outward into the city-state itself. You sense the anxiety beneath their calm. In Sparta, a family's standing can shift with the success or failure of a single son, a single marriage. The landscape is dotted with tombs, each one marked by simple stones. Unlike the elaborate monuments of Egypt, Spartan burials are understated, but they tell stories all the same. Only those who died in childbirth or in battle receive special honours, a reminder that the ultimate sacrifices are also the truest measure of one's contribution to the line. You pause at a grave, reading a name carved deep into the stone. This, you realise, is how most Spartans will be remembered, not for personal achievement, but for fulfilling their role in the lineage, for holding up their end of the city's heavy bargain. You move onward to the Syssitia, the communal meals where every adult male citizen is expected to eat. The air is thick with the smell of barley bread and black broth. Conversations are laced with subtle reminders of heritage. My grandfather stood at Thermopylae, one man says. Another replies, my father's shield hangs in the agora. These statements are not boasts, but affirmations of continuity. Every meal is a kind of ritual, reinforcing the interconnectedness of all present. You realise that for the Spartans, the individual is always in service to the lineage, and the lineage is always in service to the state. In the quiet moments between these rituals, you catch glimpses of what is not said. The system is strong, but it is not infallible. You sense the pressure on those who do not quite fit, the sons who are not strong enough, the daughters who cannot bear children, the families who lose too many members to war. You feel the sorrow that lingers behind closed doors, the sense of failure that cannot be spoken aloud. In Sparta there is little room for weakness, little space for deviation. The family line must continue, no matter the personal cost. You walk through the agora, the public marketplace, and watch as elders gather to discuss the future. The city is always planning, always worrying about what comes next. The preservation of the bloodline is not just a matter of pride, it is an existential necessity. Without new citizens, Sparta will wither. The elders track marriages, births, even the smallest alliances between families. You realise that lineage here is a kind of national obsession, a living record that must be maintained at all costs. Yet there is also resilience in this system. The lines bend but do not break. When tragedy strikes, families adopt promising boys from other houses, folding them into their own, reinforcing the idea that what matters most is not biology, but the willingness to serve. You see young men who bear the names of their adoptive fathers, who take up the shield and legacy as if they were born to it. The city's story continues, strengthened by both tradition and adaptation. As the night deepens, you find yourself at the edge of the city, looking out over fields silvered by moonlight. You think of all the families sleeping now, each one dreaming the same anxious dreams, that their sons will return, that their daughters will marry well, that their names will endure. In Sparta, power is not just a matter of holding office or commanding armies, it is a matter of holding together, of surviving long enough for your lineage to take root in the future. You turn away, feeling the relentless clarity of this world press against your heart. The Spartan system is harsh, yes, but it is also strangely beautiful in its unity of purpose. Here, every law, every custom, every whispered story is designed to sustain the bloodline, to keep the city strong. You sense that other places, softer, richer, more ornate, will find other ways to solve these problems. But for now, as you step back into the shadowed streets, you understand why Sparta endures. Its strength is not just in its swords or its kings, but in the quiet, stubborn persistence of its families, generation after generation, holding the line. Your journey pulls you now across the shifting sands and open plains to the heart of ancient Persia, where night in the palace is perfumed with rosewater and anticipation. The air is softer here, thick with the scent of pomegranates and lamp oil, and yet beneath it pulses a tension that never quite resolves. You pass through tall gates inlaid with glimmering tiles, their surfaces cool and smooth, and enter a world where lineage is both a map and a labyrinth. In these great courts, Susa, Persepolis, Babylon, the rules of inheritance are written not only on scrolls, but on the faces of those who gather, calculating and careful. Every cousin, every half-sibling, every spouse is part of a living, breathing web. In this place, the boundaries of family are always shifting, and you sense that the Persian kings, the Achaemenids, the Parthians, the Sassanids, learned long ago that blood can be both a shield and a weapon. The dynasty survives not only because of who marries whom, but also because of a remarkable willingness to adjust, to redefine, to claim, and occasionally to forget. You notice the women first, veiled and unveiled, some holding power openly, others quietly weaving alliances behind lattice screens. Their titles matter almost as much as their parentage. The difference between queen and consort, between full sister and cousin, is sometimes subtle, sometimes the fulcrum on which the future pivots. You slip through a corridor where the walls are painted with processions of tribute bearers, men from far-off lands, carrying gold and ivory and peacocks, all acknowledging the king's supremacy. Here, the ruler is known as King of Kings, and the title is both boast and burden. The genealogy of such a king is not merely a record, it is a tool, sharpened and honed. In this world, your worth depends not just on who your father was, but on the entire constellation of relatives orbiting you. The crown passes from hand to hand, sometimes smoothly, more often in a cascade of intrigue and sudden violence. In the private chambers, the web of family relationships grows even denser. You observe a gathering of royal children, their laughter threaded with caution. Sons of the great king might share the same father, but have different mothers, daughters of noble Persian houses, or perhaps princesses sent from distant lands to seal alliances. Each mother's rank determines the child's own place in the succession, and you sense the tension whenever one of the high-born wives passes by. The line between legitimacy and ambition is always shifting. A child born to the queen is an heir apparent, a child of a concubine might become a rival, a loyal supporter, or a future pretender, depending on the changing fortunes of court. You watch as Darius the Great, shrouded in regal calm, listens to his advisors. His claim to the throne is complicated, not the eldest son, not the obvious choice, but a man who seized opportunity when it appeared. Darius is skilled at rewriting lineage, marrying daughters of Cyrus the Great to solidify his bloodline, adopting the language of destiny and divine approval. His children, and there are many, are positioned like chess pieces, with Darius quietly ensuring that none gather too much strength without his knowledge. The daughters are married to key supporters, the sons are sent to govern distant provinces, or sometimes kept close to the palace, under careful watch. Outside, you find the courtyards alive with rumour. There are stories of sibling marriages, not quite as central as in Egypt, but present all the same, especially among royalty intent on tightening the bonds of power. Sometimes, a king marries his half-sister, sometimes his cousin, and sometimes, when expedience requires, his own daughter. Each time the aim is the same, to keep the throne within reach, to prevent outside families from grasping what has been built over generations. In the official histories, these unions are glossed over, presented as natural, even virtuous, when they succeed. When they fail, the scribes quietly edit them out. You linger near a fountain, the water murmuring softly. In this place, queens are often cousins, sometimes sisters, almost always related by blood or by shared ambition. The children of these unions grow up steeped in expectation, their games and rivalries echoing the adult struggles that swirl around them. You see how a simple meal can become an opportunity for subtle testing, who sits closest to the king, who is offered the choicest morsel, whose laughter is met with approval. Every gesture, every glance is a signal, and behind each one, a calculation. As the night deepens, you pass into the royal archives, where genealogies are recorded in careful script. There are lines connecting names you recognise: Xerxes, Artaxerxes, Atossa, and lines linking the living to legendary founders, stretching back in time beyond what anyone truly remembers. The scribes are experts in possibility. When a new king rises, the family tree can be redrawn, a forgotten aunt elevated to queen, a cousin declared to be the child of a god. Here, lineage is both record and story, wielded with as much precision as any blade. You move into a banquet hall, the tables heavy with fruit and wine, and listen to the low conversations. The families of nobles and satraps mingle, their marriages carefully planned. The stakes are always present. A single union can bring peace to a province, while a slighted cousin might ignite rebellion. You realise how exhausting it must be to live with every relationship carrying so much weight. Even friendships are strategic. A daughter sent to marry a powerful satrap may find herself both pawn and queen, her children born with both claim and vulnerability. the shadows lengthen, and you find yourself drawn to the story of Artaxerxes II, whose mother was a powerful queen, whose siblings and half-siblings circled him warily. In this world, the mother's influence can be as important as the father's. Some queens become legendary for their cunning, Parysatis for example, whose reach extended across generations, shaping the succession with a word, a gift or a poison. You sense how the web of Lineage is not just about men, it is about women who know exactly when to step forward, and when to let others take the blame. As you slip into the gardens, you reflect on the paradox of Persian power. To endure, the dynasty must both open and close itself. Cousin marriages and close kin unions guard the throne, yet too much inbreeding threatens weakness. Too little brings in outsiders who might one day rebel. The balance is delicate, and every generation must navigate it anew. Sometimes you realise the most powerful person in the court is not the king, but the grandmother who remembers every connection, every slight, every secret that might one day decide the future. You sit quietly, letting the air cool around you, and watch as the children of the palace play beneath the stars. Their lives are shaped by decisions made long before their births, by marriages designed to secure a crown, by the calculations of people who might not even remember their names. The stories of their ancestors are told again and again, each telling smoothing over the rough edges, each generation claiming a little more certainty, a little more inevitability. As the lamps are dimmed and the palace grows quiet, you sense the vulnerability beneath all the ceremony. For all its grandeur, Persian power is always at risk, from rivals within, from provinces without, from the ever-present temptation to bend the truth of lineage just a little further for the sake of security. You feel the weight of the web, its threads sticky and unbreakable. There is comfort in belonging, in knowing your place. There is also the fear that a single misstep could see your name erased, your story untold. You leave the palace as dawn threatens the horizon, carrying with you the understanding that in Persia, lineage is an art and a weapon, a constantly shifting dance in which every participant must know their steps. Cousins become queens, sons become rivals, daughters become the silent arbiters of peace and war. In this world, power is never static. It is always being renegotiated, always being woven anew. And as you fade into the light, you realise how much of history is shaped by these quiet calculations, by the ceaseless, delicate balancing of blood. The air thickens again as you drift forward, drawn to the Mediterranean's southern shore, where the sand glows silver under the moon, and the cities are a patchwork of Greek ambition and Egyptian memory. Here, the night is both ancient and new, heavy with the scent of lotus and oil, salt and dust. You arrive in Alexandria, the jewel of the Hellenistic world, founded by Alexander, inherited by his general Ptolemy, and ruled now by a dynasty that takes sibling marriage and lineage to their most dazzling, and sometimes dizzying, extremes. In these marble halls, where the blue of the sea meets the gold of the desert, power coils around bloodline in ways that seem both familiar and strange, as if every rule has been rewritten, but the old anxieties never truly vanished. You walk along corridors lined with painted tiles and limestone statues, hearing the soft shuffle of sandals and the whisper of silk. The Ptolemies, you realise, have inherited not only Egypt's wealth and wisdom, but its habits too, including the tradition of sibling marriage, which they turn from religious ritual into ruthless statecraft. Every mural you pass seems to echo this logic, brother and sister, king and queen, standing side by side beneath the wings of Isis, faces idealised and eerily alike. There is a sharpness to this repetition, a calculated determination to keep the throne sealed within one family. No outsider will dilute the blood or threaten the dynasty's claim. You sense the anxiety beneath the splendour, the need to remind everyone, in every generation, who belongs and who does not. The first Ptolemy, a Macedonian general with the instincts of a survivor, chose Egypt as his prize when Alexander's empire fractured. He set about constructing a new dynasty, one that would not merely rule, but become Egyptian in the eyes of its people. Sibling marriage offered a solution. The Ptolemies married sisters, cousins, nieces, even stepmothers if it kept the line unbroken and the throne untouchable. These were not casual unions, but carefully orchestrated performances, staged for the gods and the public alike. You stand in a vast hall where the ceiling is painted with constellations, and the new queen, Berenice, is presented to the priests as both king's wife and king's sister. The priests nod, the crowds cheer, and the lineage is secured for another season. But behind the ritual, you sense the relentless calculations at play. The dynasty's survival depends on projecting continuity, on erasing the possibility that the throne could ever be claimed by a rival. You listen as the royal advisors argue about the merits of a particular union. Is this cousin close enough to reinforce legitimacy, or too close to risk the weaknesses that sometimes haunt these bloodlines? The conversations are laced with anxiety and hope in equal measure. In Alexandria, power is always being rehearsed, perfected, and guarded by the thinnest margins. You find yourself at a royal banquet, the tables heaped with figs, honeycakes, and roasted birds. The family gathers, a tapestry of relationships so tangled that even the participants sometimes struggle to keep them straight. Brothers have become husbands, sisters have become queens and stepmothers. Every child is both a potential heir and a potential threat. You watch as Cleopatra II, daughter and sister-wife of Ptolemy the Sick, sits beside her brother-husband and surveys the room. Her gaze is steady, calculating, aware of every cousin, every rival, every child whose birth might tip the balance. This is not a world for the faint-hearted. Every marriage is a move in a game played for keeps. The practice of sibling marriage here goes beyond religious tradition. It is a political necessity, a way to avoid alliances with the Greek or Egyptian nobility that might dilute royal authority. The Ptolemies want their dynasty to remain above the city's squabbles, immune to the ambitions of those outside the royal family. And yet, even as they close ranks, the pressure builds. The children of these unions grow up in a world where affection and rivalry are never far apart, where the lines between sibling, spouse, and enemy blur with every new generation. You wander into the library, the greatest in the ancient world, where scholars labour through the night, copying scrolls and debating philosophy. Even here, the logic of power seeps in. The king's patronage decides which books are copied, which stories are told. History is being written with each passing hour, sometimes smoothing over the awkward facts, sometimes inventing new connections to reinforce the dynasty's claims. The Ptolemies sponsor cults and festivals celebrating their divine ancestry, blending Greek and Egyptian gods into a seamless story that justifies their rule. To the people of Egypt, the dynasty must always appear unshakable, its blood pure and its mandate eternal. But the reality is messier. You move through the palace gardens, where the air is thick with jasmine and the night hides secrets in every shadow. The Ptolemies, for all their efforts, are not immune to the dangers that come with keeping power so tightly contained. Sibling rivalries turn deadly, poison finds its way into wine cups, children disappear or are quietly sent away. The family tree is as much a record of violence as it is of continuity. A sister-wife becomes an enemy overnight, and cousins raised together become the bitterest of rivals. The very closeness that preserves the line also breeds suspicion, jealousy, and sometimes open war. You pass by the nursery, where children play under the watchful eyes of nurses and tutors. Each child carries within them the weight of 1,000 expectations. They are told from their first steps that their lives are not their own, that every friendship, every word spoken could shape the future of a kingdom. For some, this burden becomes a source of strength. For others, it is a quiet, lifelong sorrow. You can almost hear the echo of their footsteps in the empty corridors, the laughter that sometimes turns to silence when a parent's gaze falls upon them. As you slip through the palace, you sense the growing instability that will one day consume the dynasty. The Ptolemies' refusal to look outward, their obsession with purity and control, becomes their undoing. Plots thicken, trust erodes, and the city that once shone as a beacon of culture becomes a stage for tragedy. Even Cleopatra VII, the last and most famous of the line, inherits not just the wealth and splendour of her ancestors, but the web of expectations, betrayals, and family feuds that have been building for generations. Her own unions with her brothers are both duty and disaster, played out beneath the eyes of a restless world. Yet for all its darkness, there is something compelling in this world. The way ritual and reality intertwine, the way power tries to freeze time and make every tomorrow a perfect copy of today. You leave the palace and wander the streets of Alexandria as dawn approaches. Fishermen are already stirring along the shore, merchants open their stalls, and the city's heartbeat resumes its restless rhythm. The dynasty's story will end, but the echoes of its choices will ripple outward for centuries. You realise now that the Ptolemaic game is not just about blood, but about imagination. The ability to convince others that the world can be made stable, that the circle of family is stronger than the pull of chaos. For a time, it works. The great festivals, the processions, the golden statues, all reinforce the illusion. But nothing lasts forever, not even in the most splendid of palaces. The bloodlines thin, the alliances falter, and history moves forward, always hungry for new stories. As you step away from the halls of Alexandria, the moon high and the city quiet, you carry with you the sense that power, at its core, is about boundaries. Who is inside, who is outside, who belongs, and who must never be allowed to. The Ptolemies drew their circle as tightly as possible, and for generations it kept them safe. But in the end, no circle can hold forever. The tides of the Mediterranean wash against the palace walls, carrying away the old certainties, reminding you that every lineage, no matter how carefully guarded, is only a story told in the night. You pass beneath an arch inscribed with laurel leaves, the scent of pine and distant smoke mingling, as you enter the city whose name is whispered through centuries. Rome. The world here is fuller, busier, thrumming with horses' hooves on flagstones, the cries of vendors, the laughter of children, and always the endless shuffle of ambition. Rome, more than any place before, understands the limits and possibilities of blood. It is a city built on the promise of lineage and the reality of power, two currents that sometimes flow together, sometimes twist and clash beneath the city's marble skin. You walk through the Forum as dusk falls, a space alive with argument, promises and betrayals. Here, family matters, but not in quite the same way as the temples and palaces you have already drifted through. Roman lineage is not only a matter of who begot whom, or which gods claim you, it is also a question of paper, law, performance. The real heart of the Roman system is the idea that blood can be borrowed, adopted, even manufactured, if you have the right allies and the right story. Step into the atrium of a grand house, where the walls are painted with gardens and gods. Family busts line the shelves, stern, unblinking faces of ancestors, their marble eyes fixed on every guest, every child. This is the house of an old patrician family, and you feel the weight of expectation as soon as you cross the threshold. Each Roman name is a thread in a tapestry stretching back through consuls and censors, generals and priests. It is a lineage built not only on blood but on achievement. Every dinner conversation is thick with reminders. Our ancestor fought at Cannae, your great-uncle rebuilt the aqueduct, remember who you are. Children are raised on stories of family glory, and every wedding, every birth, every adoption is another chance to strengthen the line. You move to the back garden, where two brothers are locked in a quiet, fierce argument. In Rome, family is both shield and battlefield. The rules of inheritance are precise, but the reality is anything but simple. Primogeniture, the firstborn inheriting all, is rare. Property and titles are often divided, producing webs of obligation and rivalry. But the real innovation here is the power of adoption. You watch as an older man, childless perhaps, or simply ambitious, chooses a younger relative, a nephew, sometimes even a stranger, and names him son. In that moment, the line bends and twists, new branches growing overnight. Blood can be claimed, legitimacy rewritten. You step into the shadow of the capital, where the city's greatest drama unfolds, the succession of emperors. The Republic is long gone, replaced by a system where the personal is always political, where the family's fate is the empire's fate. You see Augustus, Rome's first emperor, surrounded by statues and sycophants, his legacy at stake. Augustus has no living sons, only a daughter, Julia, whose marriages and children become chess moves in a game stretching across decades. Through clever marriages and adoptions, Augustus shapes the succession, his stepson Tiberius, his grandsons Gaius and Lucius, and then, as fate and intrigue claim them, others. Every new heir is announced with fanfare, but behind the ceremony lies a constant churn of hope, disappointment, and suspicion. The genius of Rome is this: it makes the adoption of heirs seem not only practical, but almost sacred. To be chosen by the emperor is to be reborn. Your past, your parents, even your name can be changed to fit the story Rome needs at the moment. You remember how Augustus adopted Tiberius, then forced Tiberius to adopt Germanicus, so the line might continue, weaving through families and generations like a vine. Sometimes the best blood is not enough. Sometimes the right story matters more. Yet the realities of family, marriage, and inheritance are rarely smooth. You drift through the imperial palace, where the candlelight flickers over secrets. Emperors and senators alike marry nieces, cousins, stepdaughters, sometimes out of love, more often out of strategy. The Julio-Claudians, Rome's most notorious dynasty, are famous for these convoluted unions. Claudius, old and awkward, marries his niece Agrippina to secure an heir. Agrippina's son, Nero, is adopted and declared successor. You can feel the discomfort in the walls, the tension at every feast. Rome's obsession with the family is never entirely comfortable. It is a web as much as a lifeline. Not all these unions are political. Sometimes genuine affection flickers through, as between Marcus Aurelius and his cousin Faustina, who bear a dozen children together. But power makes everything complicated. You watch as siblings raised together become rivals overnight, as mothers whisper in the shadows, shaping the future in ways the law cannot see. Poison slips into cups, rivals are sent into exile or forced to end their own lives. To be born into a Roman imperial family is to live with the knowledge that every privilege is also a risk. You wander through the city's quieter quarters, where ordinary Romans echo the patterns set above. Adoption is common, not only among the rich. Freed slaves sometimes become heirs, close friends take the place of lost sons. Blood matters, but belonging is more powerful still. A man's last will is read aloud in a smoky room, his chosen heir weeping, neighbours nodding in approval or envy. The city is full of stories like these, of families remade by chance and choice, of lines preserved not by accident of birth, but by acts of will. Still, the old anxieties persist. You sense the fear that if a family line falters, it will vanish. No statues, no stories, no memory. The cult of the ancestors is a daily ritual. Their images are carried in funeral processions, their deeds invoked at every public ceremony. The dead demand continuity, and the living strive to give it to them. Even the poorest citizen saves for the funerary mask, the last gesture that ties him to the eternal web of Rome. In the shadows, another layer emerges. The line between public and private is thin. Scandal is never far away. Romans love gossip, and the family's honour is always at risk. If a marriage goes wrong, if a child disappoints, if an heir is disinherited, the neighbours know before the ink is dry. You overhear a group of matrons murmuring about a senator's daughter sent to the provinces in disgrace, about an adopted son who proved unworthy and was cast out. Reputation is as fragile as blood, and sometimes even more easily lost. You pause in a temple, the scent of incense and stone filling the air. Here you remember that for all Rome's pragmatism, superstition endures. Oaths sworn by ancestors are sacred. Gods are invoked at every new beginning. The family's lairs, little household gods, are tended with care, their approval sought before every major step. To break with tradition is to invite chaos, not only for yourself, but for generations yet to come. The night thickens as you pass by the Tiber's dark water, the lamps of the city reflected in ripples. You think of all the children sleeping in houses rich and poor, their dreams shaped by stories of what it means to belong, to inherit, to become more than themselves. In Rome, the past is always present, haunting, inspiring, shaping every hope. Blood, law, and love are knotted together in ways that are never entirely resolved. You move finally toward the edge of the city, where tombs line the road like sentinels. Each one is inscribed with names and virtues, the accomplishments of the dead engraved for the ages. Some are the tombs of emperors, guarded by stone lions and rumours. Others are more humble, marked by simple words and faded memories. But every tomb tells the same story. Here is someone who belonged, who was claimed, who left a mark on the world. The greatest fear in Rome is not death, but oblivion, being forgotten, becoming a break in the chain. The dawn is close now. You leave Rome behind, carrying with you the lessons of a city that learned how to bend family to its needs, how to rewrite the rules of belonging, how to make the future out of the past. In Rome, power is not a birthright. It is a story, retold in marble, paper and memory, claimed and reclaimed with every new generation. Your path shifts now, carried eastward by a hush of silk and a chill of winter air, into a world as orderly as it is mysterious. China rises before you in twilight, cities sleeping beneath curved rooftops and vermilion gates. Lanterns flicker, the clatter of carriage wheels fades into the night, and the forbidden city glows with the golden promise of dynasty. Here, in this immense maze of stone and silence, power is a script written over centuries, each emperor a brushstroke, each consort and son a delicate line in the great painting of Lineage. The rules seem ancient and immutable, but in the corridors and gardens where shadows lengthen, you find the same dramas echoing that have haunted every royal house before: desire, fear, intrigue, and the ceaseless pursuit of legitimacy. You walk through the Meridian Gate as a servant unseen, your presence barely more than a breath in the evening. The walls of the palace rise around you, 40 feet high and thick as destiny, cutting off the world outside. Inside, it is another universe, a world where the Emperor is the Son of Heaven, his will the axis on which all things turn. You move silently, passing courtiers whose silks rustle with secrets, eunuchs whose eyes are sharp as daggers, and concubines trailing fragrances of jasmine and longing. Here, the fate of empires hangs on the outcome of a single night, a whispered promise, a slip of red silk left at the foot of a bed. In China, dynasty is everything. The mandate of heaven grants the right to rule, but that mandate is always conditional, always threatened by the faintest sign of disorder. Bloodlines are a fortress, but also a battleground, and you sense the tension humming beneath every celebration. The emperor's children, princes and princesses in silken robes, are watched from birth by tutors, doctors and spies. They are treasures, but also hostages to fortune. To produce a son is the highest of honours. To fail is to tempt the mandate's withdrawal, to risk disaster for the whole clan. You slip through a moonlit courtyard, past ancient cypresses and guardian lions. The Empress sits behind a carved jade screen, her expression calm, her mind alert to every danger. In the court, rank is everything, and even the most powerful consort can fall from grace in a single night. You feel her worry for her own children, her calculation of alliances, who to trust, who to watch, how to keep her sons close without seeming to scheme. The Emperor's favour is fickle, and a rumour is sometimes more dangerous than an enemy's blade. Daughters may be married off to powerful families, forging alliances that outlast any single reign, but sons are at once the hope and the hazard of the dynasty. Within the inner palace, the rules of succession are famously complex. In theory, the eldest son of the Empress becomes heir apparent. In practice, competition is fierce, and nothing is certain until the Emperor's dying breath. Concubines whisper to their children at night, filling their dreams with visions of dragons and thrones. Princes are schooled in poetry, calligraphy, strategy, and in the art of survival. Each knows that his brothers are rivals as much as kin. You witness the subtle games, a gift left in a rival's quarters, a slip of information fed to a tutor, the careful cultivation of allies among the eunuchs and generals. You sense how the Emperor's affections can change the fate of nations. The love for a particular woman, the birth of a child on an auspicious day, the skill of a mother in navigating court politics, any of these can determine the line of succession. It is not uncommon for an emperor to pass over his eldest son, naming instead a younger child whose mother holds greater influence, or whose character better matches the needs of the state. The proclamation of an heir is a moment of celebration and fear, for it invites both loyalty and conspiracy. As you wander the palace halls, you notice how closely the imperial line is guarded. Sibling marriages are rare, frowned upon by Confucian ideals, but the impulse to keep power within the family remains. Cousin marriages, alliances between branches of the imperial clan, are frequent. The goal is always to reinforce the legitimacy of the house, to prevent outsiders from gaining a foothold in the heart of power. At times, the web grows so tight that a single mistake, a rebellion, a scandal, a mysterious illness, can shake the whole structure. You hear tales of powerful empresses and dowagers who have shaped the course of history. The legendary Empress Wu Zetian, who rose from concubine to emperor in her own right, redefines the limits of power and lineage. Others, like Empress El of the Han or Cixi of the Qing, wield authority from behind the throne, manipulating the succession with a mixture of love, fear, and calculation. These women are both guardians and disruptors of lineage, ensuring their sons ascend while neutralizing threats, often at great personal cost. In quieter moments, you sense the human side of all this grandeur. A young prince, lonely despite 100 attendants, studies the stories of his ancestors, searching for a lesson or a warning. A princess, sent far from home to marry a general, wonders if her children will ever know the warmth of their grandfather's embrace. The palace is filled with laughter and sorrow, hope and regret. Every joy is shadowed by the knowledge that, in the end, only a few will matter in the annals of history, and the rest may disappear into silence. The rituals of succession are elaborate. When an emperor dies, the court is plunged into mourning, and the question of inheritance becomes urgent. Ministers argue, generals posture, and the city holds its breath. The proclamation of the new emperor is a moment of both relief and tension, for it signals stability, but also invites new uncertainties. Brothers may become bitter enemies, forced into exile or compelled to end their own lives for the sake of the state. Mothers weep in private, knowing that the rise of one son often means the fall of another. Outside the palace, the people are aware of these dramas, though they witness them only as rumours and edicts. The imperial clan is both revered and resented, its excesses whispered about in markets and tea-houses. Tales of princes gone astray, of concubines poisoning rivals, of generals rising and falling with each new reign, all become part of the living memory of the city. The line between myth and reality blurs, but the principle remains: the strength of the dynasty is the foundation of the world. You step out into the imperial gardens, where the willow branches stir in the night wind and the moonlight pools in the lotus ponds. Here, the children of the palace play at war and peace, imitating their elders in games whose stakes they do not yet understand. You watch them, and you see the future, hopeful, precarious, and utterly dependent on the choices of those who came before. In every generation, the same question returns: who will inherit, who will fall, and what will be remembered when the last lantern is extinguished? As dawn nears, you leave the Forbidden City behind, carrying with you the memory of its vast halls and quiet sorrows. In China, as in every corner of the world, lineage is both shield and sword, a dream of continuity shadowed by the constant possibility of change. The dynasty endures only as long as its sons and daughters can uphold the mandate, and as long as the stories told in palace corridors are believed by those beyond its walls. The night air grows thinner as you rise, dreamlike, toward the spine of a continent, southward, upward, into the rarefied world of the Andes. Here, under a sweep of brilliant stars and the chill breath of mountain wind, power looks different, yet familiar. In the stone citadels of Cusco and the sun-drenched terraces that cascade down the mountainsides, you discover a civilization built on order, ritual, and the golden thread of lineage, the Inca. The landscape itself seems to conspire in the preservation of power, its valleys and peaks shaping the lives and destinies of those who rule. You walk the narrow paths winding along sheer cliffs, passing fields of maize and potatoes, tended by hands that know the land as an inheritance. In the city at the empire's heart, the palaces are made of stones fitted so tightly that not even a whisper of air can slip between them. The air is fragrant with burning herbs and earth. Within these walls, the Sapa Inca, the living son of the sun, reigns supreme, a figure both exalted and isolated, at the very centre of a web of kinship as intricate as the city's network of sacred lines. Here, the principle of bloodline is carried to a spiritual height. The Inca claimed descent from Inti, the sun god, and every ruler is presented as his literal child, both blessed and bound by that divine ancestry. Sibling marriage is not merely permitted, but enshrined. You watch as a royal brother and sister, their garments woven with gold thread, are united in a ceremony watched by priests, nobles, and the city's ever-watchful spirits. The aim is clear. Only by marrying his full sister can the Sapa Inca ensure that his children inherit both the human and the divine right to rule. The royal line must be unbroken, as pure and as luminous as the sun itself. But this purity is not a matter of vanity or tradition alone. In a world where alliances are crucial and rival clans might always be waiting for a sign of weakness, sibling marriage keeps the throne securely within the family. The queen, the Koya, is both sister and partner, holding her own ritual power, her own property, her own voice in council. Together, Sapa Inca and Koya preside over an empire that stretches from the snowfields of Ecuador to the deserts of Chile. Its unity owed as much to the clarity of its succession as to the discipline of its armies. You stand among the priests as they prepare for a solstice festival, the plaza crowded with offerings of coca, chicha, and llama fat. It is here, in the open air, that the Inca demonstrate their power, parading the mummies of past rulers, their bodies preserved and honoured, still consulted for advice and blessing. Lineage here is a living thing, connecting the living and the dead, binding together every community in the empire with invisible cords. The ancestors are never truly gone. Their approval, or their wrath, is a constant force. The Sapa Inca, for all his glory, rules not just for himself, but as the vessel of all who came before. Within the palace, the pressure of this heritage is ever present. The children of the royal house are raised in an atmosphere of reverence and vigilance. The sons of the Sapa Inca are many, but only those born of the Koya, his sister wife, can claim full legitimacy. The others, offspring of noble concubines and lesser wives, are valued, trained as generals or governors, but always reminded of their place. Every festival, every harvest, every military campaign is another opportunity to reinforce the sacred nature of the bloodline. Rituals are elaborate and constant, purifications, blessings, the careful retelling of myths that explain and justify every choice. You watch the Koya as she presides over her own court, surrounded by noblewomen whose rank is determined by genealogy as much as merit. She is no passive figure. In times of crisis, she can serve as regent, commanding respect not only as the wife and sister of the ruler, but as a descendant of Inti in her own right. The balance of power within the royal family is delicate. A single misstep can provoke unrest, and the memory of past dynastic struggles lingers in every whispered conversation. The practice of sibling marriage among the Inca is both spiritual and pragmatic. It prevents rival clans from infiltrating the heart of power, but it also carries dangers. The genetic risks are known, if not named. When a child of the Sapa Inca is weak or ill, the priests debate whether the gods are displeased or whether some hidden impurity has entered the line. This anxiety is kept from public view, masked by the unyielding confidence of ritual. Outwardly, the royal family embodies perfection, its authority reinforced by public displays of abundance, harmony, and unbroken succession. Outside the walls of Cusco, the power of lineage is echoed in every community. Across the empire, local chiefs trace their own bloodlines back to ancient founders, claiming kinship with the ruling house, sometimes inventing or elaborating their connections for prestige. You walk among the people as they tell stories of their origins, blending myth and memory into a tapestry that gives order to the world. Children learn these stories at their mother's knee, absorbing not only their own family's place in the cosmos, but also the expectation that they, too, will serve the larger order. As you wander the terraces, you observe the everyday consequences of this obsession with lineage. Marriages are carefully arranged, not just among royalty, but among all who hold power. In some villages, cousin marriage is common, reinforcing alliances and keeping land and authority within the Ailu, the kin group that defines each person's identity. Festivals become opportunities to recite genealogies, to honour ancestors, to remind everyone who belongs where. The past is always present, shaping every decision, every hope. Yet for all its rigidity, the system allows for moments of change. When a ruler dies without an obvious heir, the priests and nobles gather in solemn council, weighing the merits and the blood of each candidate. Sometimes a younger son or a nephew is chosen, his lineage retroactively strengthened by ritual, by stories, by the blessing of the mummies. You sense how the need for stability shapes even these moments of uncertainty. Above all, the empire cannot be allowed to falter. The sun must rise on a world that still makes sense. You return to Cusco as dusk falls, the city glowing with the fires of celebration. The Sapper Inca and his sister queen appear on a golden balcony, their presence a living reminder of the order that holds the world together. Below, the people sing and dance, their voices rising in a hymn to the sun. For now at least, the harmony of blood and power is secure. As night deepens, you walk the silent avenues, past storerooms full of maize, armories gleaming with bronze. The city is quiet, but beneath the calm you sense the constant anxiety that attends every royal house. What if the line is broken? What if the gods turn away? The answers are never clear. In the morning, rituals will begin again, stories will be retold, alliances will be reaffirmed. The golden thread will be rewoven, tighter, stronger, brighter. The Andean sky is vast and cold above you as you leave the heart of the empire behind. In the world of the Inca, lineage is not just a matter of politics or power. It is the very structure of reality, a framework as eternal and as fragile as the stones of Cusco itself. The road dips north and west, and the taste of mountain wind fades, replaced by the foggy chill of old stone castles and green valleys, Europe's patchwork of kingdoms and duchies, where power, family and fate become a maze no less intricate than any sun temple or marble court. It is a world where the flickering torchlight in a long gallery casts monstrous shadows, and the history of blood is written not only in chronicles, but in the faces of those who rule. Here, as you walk the halls of Habsburg Vienna, Bourbon Paris, and the dark keeps of Spain, the obsession with lineage and the labyrinth of royal marriage reach their most tangled, public, and paradoxical expressions. You wander through a chilly corridor in the Hofburg Palace, boots echoing off marble and parquet. The walls are hung with portraits, some fine and proud, others a little haunted. You linger at the image of a monarch whose jaw juts forward, an unmistakable sign of the Habsburg legacy, bred and rebred over generations of cousin marriages. In this corner of Europe, keeping power in the family is not just a convenience, it is the entire logic of statecraft. The Habsburgs, lords of Austria, Spain, and a dozen other realms, are notorious for their refusal to let the world in. Marriages are made to cousins, nieces, uncles, sometimes even uncles to nieces, when the necessity is great enough and the family tree grows too narrow for comfort. It is not simply a matter of pride. With realms scattered across mountains and rivers, languages and religions, only family can be trusted to hold the fragile union together. You watch as a princess, little more than a child, is dispatched across the continent to marry her cousin and cement an alliance. Her trunk is filled with dresses and tears. At the altar, two branches of the same family, already intertwined for generations, are bound even closer. It is a ritual repeated so many times that the faces in the wedding portraits begin to blur together. In the echoing halls of Madrid's royal palace, the story continues. The Spanish branch of the Habsburgs is, if anything, more stubborn in its pursuit of dynastic purity. Here, the desire to avoid outside influence is so powerful that marriages are sometimes arranged between uncle and niece, aunt and nephew, until the family tree threatens to collapse in on itself. You see the cost in the eyes of Charles II, the last Habsburg king of Spain, his features distorted by generations of inbreeding, his mind as troubled as his body. For all the grandeur of the palace and the riches of the empire, you sense the shadow of anxiety. What is gained in power may be lost in vitality. Yet the logic is difficult to escape. The alternative to cousin marriage is to let outsiders in, Bourbons from France, Wettons from Saxony, strangers whose loyalties may lie elsewhere. In a world where the borders of nations shift with every royal birth or death, family is the only line that seems secure. You move through the corridors of Versailles, past gardens sculpted to perfection, and sense the same anxieties lurking beneath the powdered wigs and gilded mirrors. Here, as in Vienna and Madrid, marriage is a matter of diplomacy first and sentiment last. The fate of entire peoples may rest on the willingness of a teenage girl to marry a distant cousin she has never met. But family entanglement is not only a Habsburg obsession. You follow the threads east and west, finding cousin marriages in the royal houses of Britain, Denmark, Russia, and beyond. Sometimes the reasoning is political, to keep wealth, land, and armies in trusted hands. Sometimes it is spiritual, a belief that the royal blood is special, touched by God, and must not be mixed with commoners. Everywhere the practice is shored up by myth and custom. Even as science and reason begin to flicker into the world, the old logic persists. Blood will tell, and only blood can guarantee the future. Yet with every wedding, the danger grows. The genetic risks of close-kin marriage become increasingly clear as the centuries pass. Children are born with fragile bodies, strange ailments, minds clouded or slow. Some live in the shadows of the court, hidden from view. Others are thrust into the spotlight, their struggles a matter of public speculation and private grief. Doctors whisper, priests pray, and mothers weep behind closed doors. The mighty castles of Europe become at once fortresses and prisons, places where the very desire for stability breeds new forms of uncertainty. You pass through a gallery in Windsor Castle, portraits stretching in both directions, each face a testament to the long experiment in royal self-preservation. In the Victorian age, Queen Victoria herself marries her cousin Prince Albert, and their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren fan out across Europe's thrones. The First World War will see cousins fighting cousins, George V of Britain, Wilhelm II of Germany, and Nicholas II of Russia, all descended from Victoria, bound by blood, yet divided by ambition and fate. The old idea of family as a shield is tested to its breaking point, but in quieter corners, the logic of cousin marriage continues, often away from public scrutiny. You hear stories of minor princelings and baronesses, their fortunes rising and falling on the strength of a carefully arranged union. In small courts and grand ones alike, the same anxieties repeat. Will the heir be healthy? Will the house endure? Will a foreigner seize what is rightfully ours? Even as republics and revolutions sweep away many of the old thrones, the principle of keeping power close to home remains. You see the costs and the comforts of these arrangements in the daily life of the courts. Siblings raised as rivals, cousins raised as sweethearts, alliances brokered over cradles and graves. The women of these families, queens, duchesses, princesses, are often the true glue of the dynasty, their marriages, pregnancies, and dowries binding together nations as surely as any treaty. Yet their fates are often circumscribed by the very alliances they are asked to make. You walk past a garden where a queen paces, her letters full of longing for home, her life defined by the children she must bear and the peace she must keep. The anxiety of lineage seeps even into the art and music of these courts. You listen to a composer, his melody both joyful and mournful, commissioned for a wedding that everyone hopes will heal old wounds. You see a painter struggle to flatter his royal subject, painting out the signs of inherited weakness, hoping that posterity will remember beauty and power, not the hidden scars. Yet for all the pressures, there is pride in the family line, a sense that to be born to such a house is to be touched by history. Even the most reluctant royal learns to recite the list of ancestors, to trace their connection to Charlemagne, to the Capets, to the Plantagenets, to the gods themselves. In times of crisis, these stories are a comfort, a reassurance that the blood is strong and the future secure. At festivals and funerals, the names of the ancestors are invoked, their deeds celebrated, their shadows welcomed as old friends. But the world is changing. New ideas of nation and merit, equality and reason, begin to challenge the old faith in blood. As you leave the shadowed halls of Europe's castles, you sense the slow unravelling of a system that once seemed eternal. Republics will rise, old crowns will fall, and yet, in the hearts of many, the fascination with royal lineage will never entirely die. You walk away under a sky dark with possibility, knowing that the story of cousin marriage is not simply one of genetic risk or social conservatism. It is a story about fear and hope, about the desire to hold on to power and identity in a world that never stops changing. The faces in the portraits watch you go, their expressions inscrutable, their secrets safe for now. But the lineages they represent, tangled and troubled and proud, remain echoes of a time when the future was always written in the blood. The journey grows quieter now, the grand ballrooms and marble halls falling behind as you slip into the cool hush of a palace at midnight. Somewhere far above, a candle gutters in an upper window. Power, you realise, has always been as much about shadows as about sunlight. For all the feasts and festivals, for all the golden threads of lineage recited at coronations, the price of maintaining dynasties has often been paid in loneliness, secrecy, and sometimes a kind of madness. You walk softly, the echoes of footsteps long dead following close behind, as the cost of holding power within a family, of making blood the only law, becomes uncomfortably clear. You pass through a gallery where the tapestries do not show battles or weddings, but strange dreamlike scenes, kings staring into the distance, queens holding infants whose faces are blurred, siblings locked in wary embrace. Here, the stories that the world tells itself about power and family become tangled with private fears. It is a world where history is always just one step away from myth, and myth from a quiet, lingering kind of sorrow. You pause at a window that looks out over silent gardens, the moon reflected in pools and fountains. You imagine the children of these dynasties, raised in luxury yet shadowed by expectation. From their first breath, they are measured, watched, and compared. Will this child be strong enough, clever enough to bear the weight of the family's legacy? If not, what then? The knowledge that one's worth is decided by birth and by chance must sometimes breed a deep, slow-burning anxiety. It is no surprise that some heirs grow into adults who cannot trust, cannot sleep, who look for comfort in excess or in cruelty. For every celebrated monarch, there is a story whispered in the dark about a prince who lost his mind, a queen who vanished from sight, a family who tore itself apart. The fragility of the human mind under the pressure of power becomes a recurring theme. You recall the madness of King George III, his mind unravelling under the burden of responsibility and the endless scrutiny of court. You remember Juana of Castile, the beloved daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, whose grief at the loss of her husband and the suspicions of her own family left her wandering the corridors of her palace, locked away for years as a madwoman whose claims to power frightened those around her. In the Romanovs, you see the shadow of haemophilia, a genetic curse passed down through careful intermarriage, turning the private suffering of one child into a public crisis for an entire nation. You pass into a small, dimly lit chapel where the prayers of the living mingle with the anxieties of the dead. The line between devotion and desperation blurs. For centuries, rulers have clung to faith not only as a source of strength, but as a final reassurance that their right to rule is just. You see, though, how quickly faith can become superstition, and superstition can lead to terror. The constant fear of divine disfavour, of omens gone awry, of dreams that warn of betrayal, creeps into every corner of royal life. Astrologers, prophets, and priests hold sway over anxious kings, promising that the right ritual or the right marriage will secure the family line. But nothing is ever certain. The deeper you walk into the labyrinth of power, the more you notice the small cruelties that go unseen. Children are separated from mothers and fathers, sent to be raised by tutors and nannies whose loyalty is to the dynasty, not the individual. Brothers and sisters, meant to be each other's closest companions, become rivals for affection, attention, inheritance. The most dangerous threats to a throne often come not from without, but from within, from a cousin who resents a slight, from an uncle who believes himself passed over, from a daughter who marries without permission. Paranoia breeds in the stillness of royal chambers, poisoning even the strongest bonds. You step into a room lined with books, each spine cracked and faded with age. The chronicles of power are also the chronicles of pain. Even when a dynasty succeeds, when a family keeps the throne for generations, there is often a hidden cost. a narrowing of vision, a suspicion of outsiders, a retreat from the world into a bubble of tradition and memory. When a dynasty fails, the collapse is often catastrophic. Assassinations, civil wars, forgotten princes living in exile or obscurity, their names stripped from history, their portraits burned or defaced. Yet, in the cracks between suffering and triumph, something else grows. The myths of mad kings and tragic queens become cautionary tales, passed from generation to generation as warnings and as explanations. You sense how stories take root, shaping not only the ways that families understand themselves, but also how the world views them. A king who talks to shadows becomes a lesson in the dangers of inbreeding or unchecked power. A queen who disappears into silence becomes a symbol of the price paid by women who are both central and powerless. Even the acts of violence, brothers murdering brothers, mothers exiling daughters, are retold not only as horrors, but as inevitable consequences of the system itself. You wander into a hall where portraits hang in double rows, faces familiar and strange, some crowned, some not. You notice the little details, a smile too tight, eyes too wide, hands folded defensively. Each face is a study in hope and caution, pride and regret. The longer you look, the clearer it becomes that the cost of keeping power in the family is not simply political, but deeply personal. It means growing up in a world where love is never uncomplicated, where trust is always conditional, and where even the most private desires must be weighed against the public good. But you also sense the ways in which the system fights back against itself. For every prince lost to madness, there is a princess who finds a way to survive, to forge a new path, to marry for love or escape the family's expectations. For every dynasty destroyed by its own ambition, there is another that bends, adapts, finds new ways to preserve itself. The human spirit, even in the most suffocating circumstances, finds small cracks through which to breathe. As you pass through a moonlit courtyard, the night is filled with the scent of roses and cold earth. You think of the countless people, servants, lovers, illegitimate children, exiles, whose stories are woven into the fabric of these dynasties, mostly unseen, mostly unrecorded. They are the shadows at the edge of every great event, the reminders that no lineage is truly pure, no power truly absolute. The mythology of family and inheritance, for all its violence and madness, is also a mythology of longing, for continuity, for meaning, for the chance to be remembered as part of something larger than oneself. You leave the palace as dawn begins to touch the sky, the candle in the upper window finally guttering out. Behind you, the shadows recede, and the world stirs to life. The cost of power remains, an echo in the hush of morning, a reminder that lineage, when bound too tightly, can create not only greatness, but sorrow and myth that will linger long after the last king has been laid to rest. You drift forward through time, the sound of bells and horse hooves softening, replaced by the electric thrum of new centuries. The world seems wider now, kingdoms and empires melting into nations, and yet the strange undercurrent of blood and lineage runs on, persistent as ever, shaping lives and ambitions in ways both overt and invisible. The great palaces are museums now, their velvet ropes holding back tourists instead of rival princes, but the longing for connection, for roots, for story, for some claim to a larger narrative, remains. You feel it everywhere, in politics and pageantry, in whispered family secrets, in the curiosity that draws strangers to spit into test tubes and wait for digital scrolls of Dina to illuminate their own histories. The dynasties of today wear suits and designer gowns, not crowns and ermine, but the logic of inheritance persists. You pass through the marbled lobby of a skyscraper, where a family name still opens doors and closes deals, and the heirs are trained in the subtle arts of succession, even as they claim to have left old aristocracies behind. The scions of old banking families, the daughters and sons of tech giants, the quiet but unbroken chains of property and title, they all operate in a space shaped by the lessons and anxieties of the ancients. Legacy is built as much on narrative as on numbers. To be from somewhere, to be a somebody, is to belong, to be measured, to be sought after and envied, and sometimes feared. You step into a parliament chamber and watch as politicians debate not only policy, but who is fit to lead, who can claim the moral, cultural, or even genetic right to rule. In some countries, royal families persist as living symbols, their every marriage, birth, or misstep front-page news. Even where monarchies have faded, the trappings of inheritance are never fully absent. You see presidents and prime ministers whose children rise after them, dynasties reborn in democratic guise. The Kennedy name in America, the Nehru-Gandhi line in India, the Bhuttos in Pakistan, the Bushes, the Trudeaus, lineage cloaked in the language of merit, but always, somewhere, relying on the weight of ancestry. Sometimes, the fascination becomes a fever. You stand in a quiet room as someone traces their genealogy on a glowing screen, discovering forgotten relatives, buried scandals, echoes of greatness or shame. Television series bring together strangers who share a single ancestor. Websites promise to reveal your royal roots or your Viking past. People search for meaning in mitochondrial DNA, in census records, in the grainy faces of old photographs. The same desires that once drove queens to arrange dynastic marriages now prompt millions to find a place in the great tapestry of humanity. But old patterns persist in quieter, subtler ways as well. You overhear the words good family, old money, proper background in 1,000 different settings, sometimes as praise, sometimes as code, sometimes as a wall. In cities and villages alike, the dance of matchmaking, inheritance, and social climbing continues. You walk past a wedding where careful introductions are made, families weighing not only love, but prospects, reputation, and the shadow of generations. The ghosts of arranged alliances whisper in the background, less obvious than before but still shaping choices, still urging people to secure the future by controlling who belongs. Meanwhile, the idea of pure blood lingers on in ways both troubling and absurd. In some corners of the world, families boast of unbroken descent, their pride sharpened by centuries of exclusion. In others, pseudo-scientific claims of superiority slip quietly into politics, into conversations about who is real, who is other, who should lead and who should follow. The lessons of royal inbreeding, of the dangers and sorrows it brought, are sometimes remembered, sometimes willfully forgotten. The impulse to draw circles, us and them, insiders and outsiders, remains as powerful as ever. You sense a new kind of sibling rivalry played out on a global scale. In boardrooms, in courts, in media empires, families fracture and recombine as brothers and sisters, cousins and stepchildren vie for their share of legacy. Lawsuits over inheritances sprawl across years and continents. Memoirs spill secrets and score old grievances. The very idea of the family business is at once comforting and fraught. Every bit as complicated as a medieval succession, every bit as prone to heartbreak and betrayal. And yet, as you walk the quiet streets of a city at night, you notice something gentler woven through the old anxieties. A grandfather tells a bedtime story, choosing not a tale of conquest, but one of love or laughter. A family gathers for a reunion, piecing together names and faces, marvelling at the simple fact of togetherness. The search for lineage, for belonging, is no longer always a quest for power or privilege. Sometimes it is simply the wish not to be forgotten, not to disappear, a desire to pass on memories, recipes, songs and stories as precious as any crown. Technology changes everything and nothing. You enter a laboratory where scientists unravel the human genome, discovering how closely all people are related, how artificial most borders really are. The dream of purity is shown to be a myth, the family of man more literal than most imagined. Yet even in this age of revelation, new forms of tribalism and hierarchy arise. People cling to identity, to uniqueness, to the comfort of belonging to a special group. The paradox of lineage endures. It divides and unites, offers safety and sows suspicion, promises immortality and brings disappointment.
You feel history's breath on your neck as you pass monuments, some ancient, some brand new, each one an attempt to claim space, to declare, we were here.
The urge to found a house, to make a name last, is no less strong for being dressed in modern clothes. Sometimes, you see, it is the only answer to the chaos of life, to build something that endures, if only for another generation. but the sharpest echoes of the past remain in the private corners of the present. A will is read, a family secret revealed, a lost child sought, and sometimes found. The same emotions that once haunted palaces and battlefields, love, envy, pride, regret, play out in apartments and kitchen tables. The story of power, lineage, and belonging is not only a history lesson, but a living, breathing reality. It pulses in every family gathering, every hope for the future, every fear of being left behind. As you let the modern world recede, you understand that the dream of belonging to a family, a tradition, a name, can never fully disappear. In every heart, there is a longing for roots that go deep, for a thread that connects past and future, for a place in the story that will outlast the self. Sometimes, the quest for lineage brings heartbreak or harm. Sometimes it brings comfort, a hand to hold, a memory that warms the night. You turn your face to the dark sky, stars obscured by city lights, and realize that the search continues, everywhere, in every tongue and every time. The world changes, but the question remains: who am I, and how will I be remembered? What story will I become a part of, and who will tell it when I am gone? In that question is all the power, all the sorrow, and all the strange, enduring beauty of lineage. A legacy not of thrones or crowns, but of people trying again and again to make their lives part of something greater than themselves. The world around you has softened, the bright glare of coronations and the clamour of dynastic feasts dissolving into the gentle hush of night. You find yourself drifting, half asleep, along the invisible seams of time, all the histories and dreams you've wandered through settling quietly around you. The long corridors and candlelit banquets, the whispered plots and the gilded cradles, the lonely queens and the children raised for destinies they did not choose. These memories float now like dust motes in a sunbeam, each one a part of the story you carry, each one gently surrendering to the calm that overtakes the world before dawn. In this hush, lineage becomes less about power and more about belonging. The grand patterns of inheritance and succession fade into the background, and what remains are the quieter, older hopes, the wishes that outlive any king or queen, any battle for the throne. You sense the universality that lingers behind every empire's obsession with blood and order, the hope for continuity, the longing for safety, the wish to be remembered by those who come after. In the absence of trumpets and decrees, you hear the simple truth behind centuries of royal plotting and passionate love stories. The desire not to be alone, to leave a mark that endures beyond a single life. You wander through a garden at night, moonlight turning dew to silver on the grass. The great stone walls of palaces seem less imposing now, their windows quiet, their towers mere silhouettes against the sky. There are no guards here, no rivals waiting behind pillars, no anxious courtiers calculating their futures. Instead, you hear the wind in the branches, the faint laughter of children at play, the murmured blessing of a grandmother, tracing the shape of an ancestor's face in a faded photograph. Lineage, in the end, is as much about these small acts of memory and kindness as it is about wars and treaties. As you slow your pace, the faces of those you've met, historical and imagined, merge with those of your own family, your own friends. The differences between pharaohs and peasants, emperors and orphans, blur in the gentle light of recollection. You see that every lineage, no matter how mighty or humble, is built of love as much as law, of forgiveness as much as ambition. In the quiet, you realize that what survives the ages is not only the gold or the stone, but the laughter and longing, the stories told at bedtime and the hands held in comfort, the forgiveness quietly offered in the face of disappointment or failure. There is a softness now in the world, a yielding that invites you to rest. The fears and rivalries that shaped the great houses of history recede, the longing for peace, for the gentle continuation of life, remains. You feel the fatigue of centuries and the warmth of all those who have ever sat awake at night, wondering about their place in the long story, wondering, perhaps as you do now, whether the world remembers or forgets, whether the shadows lengthen or the day will break anew. The power struggles and calculations lose their edge, replaced by a deeper yearning to simply belong. As sleep draws nearer, the imagery of the world softens even further. Marble thrones become pillows, crowns dissolve into the cool night air, the anxiety of inheritance is replaced by the rhythm of breath and heartbeat. The only lineage that matters is the one that links you to those you love, the ones who loved you before, the ones who will remember your laughter, your dreams, your small acts of kindness, long after your name has faded from the world's memory. This is the lineage that endures beyond gold and glory, the one that sings you to sleep as gently as a lullaby. You recall, almost distantly, how every palace had its quiet spaces, walled gardens, hidden chapels, sunlit nurseries, where the weight of the crown was set aside for an hour, and children played with spinning tops, mothers sang lullabies, and old stories were told with a twinkle in the eye. These are the moments that last, the touch of a hand, the hush of a promise, the reassurance whispered in the dark. They are the true inheritance, the quiet roots that bind generations together. You drift along the river of memory, following its gentle bends through places both strange and familiar. There is a slow surrender to the dark, a letting go of the stories that have kept you awake, a growing trust that the world will hold you gently as you sleep. The long tapestry of history rolls itself up for the night, its threads of power and passion, hope and sorrow, woven into a pattern that is both eternal and ever-changing. The air grows softer still, and your breathing slows. The noise and worry of the waking world fall away, leaving only the steady comfort of knowing you are part of something much larger than yourself, an unbroken chain of stories and dreams, of losses and beginnings, that stretches back into the shadows and forward into the dawn. Even now, in your quiet room, you are not alone. All those who have come before, kings and queens, warriors and dreamers, mothers and children, sleep beside you, their memories safe, their hopes alive, their voices humming softly just beneath the silence. So let your thoughts drift, the way a river slips through a quiet valley, winding and gentle. There is nothing left for you to do tonight, no rival to outwit, no throne to defend, no legacy to protect. You have already found your place, here in the hush between waking and dreaming, in the warmth that lingers long after the story is told. Rest now, beneath the slow, patient turning of the stars. The world is wide and old, and you are exactly where you need to be. The story will keep, the lineage endures, quiet and strong, in every heart that dares to hope. Sleep well, and may tomorrow's light find you peaceful, carried onward by all the love that came before.